Ormanay's Glass Studio, everybody. Just about to go live. I had 2 minutes left. I was having a cigarette outside before I went live. And Senior Big Butt showed up for a little snack, so thought that was pretty good timing. Let me flip you guys around. We'll give Senior Big Butt, I got him I put some peanut butter on a little piece of bread and stash him so when he comes around. There he is. You waiting? Yeah. Hi, buddy. Is this the kind you want? There you go. There you go, big what? What's up here? You wanted it down there? There you go. There you go. It's okay. Yeah. It's okay, big boy. Yeah. You doing good today? Right on. I'm just getting ready to get busy and get to work. You came along right at the right time. I'm just about ready to get in the studio and start cutting some glass. Yes, sir. You like that peanut butter, huh? Not like peanut butter sandwich on a nice comfy private porch, huh, buddy? Yeah. Let's see that big butt. Look at that big butt back there. He's a good boy. Yeah. Yes, sir, Mr. Senior Big Butt. Y'all city squirrels, you getting domesticated, huh? Yeah, you'll be sitting on my lap in another month or two. That's right. Alright, Senior Big Butt. I gotta get back inside and get some work done. Spring's coming when these storms clear. I'm gonna want to go to the lake. I got work to do. Alright. Bye, Big Butt. That's Senior Big Butt. Just having a little peanut butter snack with me. Alright, folks. It's time to get her done. Bye, Big Butt. Say bye to Big Butt, everybody. We're going inside to work. See you later, Big Butt. Alright, welcome to the stream. Getting a late start. I just stepped outside to have a quick smoke before I started my stream, and Senior Big Butt was sitting right there in my chair waiting on his little peanut butter. So welcome, welcome. We got it going on today after yesterday. We got all that big piece of glass cut out of that frame. And I've jumped ahead and got a bunch of production done. So, let me see if I can get you guys in here. I've got a bunch of this background cut out. And I've got all that 13 and all of the letters cut out. Now over here, all of this is perfectly shaped and formed, and the eagle is ready to epoxy down today. The lettering, I have E, G, R, and I. Those will be ready. Whoa, big face. You know, nobody needs that in their life. So, we've got everything wrapped up and ready, and I have such a big pile of glass and different sections of this whole project going on. I got this glass in the background to use as some color highlights, and if I need to cut a new piece as I go along. But this is the part of the project where I stop and regroup, and I'm going to go ahead. I've prepared my surface. I put my glass down and I put my pattern underneath of it, and I'm going to epoxy the main part of this today and just get it mobilized, stabilized, located, address filed, put away, and done. And then I'm going to go back and start working in and filling in this more detailed stuff once this is all affixed and solid and not moving around on me. And yes, there's a perfect pattern and everything's all drawn in, but it's glass cutting and glass grinding, and not everything is perfect, right? So stuff shifts and changes on you, and you're going to have some adjustments that you're going to need to make along the way. So let me get it set up here. All right. Let's scoot this back just a second. Get a better studio view there. A little bit at a time. How's that? That's a decent view. Can you see the work on the table well enough? Got a nice piece of glass taped down to the table. And I just want to kind of make sure that it's good and clean. Whoops, about to wipe away my letters here. So I had this letter E that I was finishing up. Let me finish this letter E right quick. Somehow that does not look like the proper piece. You know, I may have gotten these two mixed up. No? Let's see here. This does not seem like the right piece to me. Okay. And I recut that one. You know what? We're going to recut this piece right here because I don't think that was the proper scrap. I bumped into these letters earlier today and a bunch of them flipped over and shifted around on me. And so I had to recut a couple of these because I couldn't tell which one went with what. So which is why here in a few minutes we're going to get some of these glued down and we're not going to worry about it anymore. But right now, I want to cut one new piece right here for the letter E because I didn't like the way that one looked. All right, so now I've got that cut to the right size, and what I need to do is put a little bend in it. Christiana Flahat. Is that how you say that? Christian, sorry, I have an eye disease. I'm struggling with all the letters. Christian Flahout. Flahout, perhaps? I don't know. Welcome. I'm going to grind this piece of glass real quick. Tiny little piece of glass. It belongs in a letter E, the little part that goes across the top. But welcome, I'm glad you're here. We're going to grind this piece down, and this is the last piece I'm going to shape today, and we're going to start epoxying some glass down to this other piece of glass. So hold on one second. Now make sure I have that upright. Okay. So all I want to do here is put a curve in it. I just cut a little straight piece of glass and now I'm going to grind a nice little curve in there. Alright, we'll wipe the water off. And we're going to check and see if I like that. Okay, I'm going to go a little bit deeper into the material. Just a hair more. Get a nice fancy E in there. Alright. I think that'll look nice. And we'll thin it down just a hair. Alright, that's enough of that grinding. Nobody wants to listen to that grinder on live stream. Alright, welcome back. Today, we're gonna start epoxying. See this tiny, tiny little piece? That is simply one piece out of hundreds. So what I've got going on is I've got a piece of glass taped down to the table with my pattern underneath of it. And here, I'll give you all a better look. So I've got the eagle is completely cut out and ready to epoxy down to the glass. And half of the letters from the E all the way over to the GRI, those are all cut and ready to be glued down. And then, you know, I have hundreds of these background pieces that still need to be broken up. And I've got a tiny little border of gold that goes around this cross I need to cut. And that'll be a really interesting lesson because I'm saving that to teach a gauge cutting and show you a really easy way to get little tiny parallel lines that are all exactly the same width, which can be a challenge in glass cutting. And then of course I've got my red border that goes around the nameplate. Now this is going to be cut up into tiny, tiny little 1/8" strips, right? So there's still a lot of cutting that needs to be done and dealt with. But in the meantime, I want to get some of this permanently fixed down and just using some 2-part epoxy. And I want to get the main image of Eastern Washington University Eagles. We'll get that set right in the middle of this piece of glass. And then we'll start filling in the background around it as I go. So, let me see if I can get y'all a better, closer view, huh? Maybe that's the way to go there. Alright. How about that? How's that? Better view? That might be a better view there. So, y'all don't really need to see me that much. But I can try to squeeze myself in there. There's not much room. It gets small real quick. So, I've made a few adjustments and I've gotten a bunch of grinding done. And my table is just getting so convoluted that I want to clear this space out and have a fresh start. So I know that I'm going to do the G, the R, and the I, right? So I'm going to set these off to the side for now. I'll probably move them again in a minute. You know what? I think I'll just leave those right there. I have a better idea. So here's a little trick I like to do. What I'm working on now, my basic rough table is a really rough surface, and there's been a lot of glass cutting and a lot of gluing and a lot of projects. And it's, you know, it's okay for cutting some glass and doing some rough work. But then I have these nice hardwood tile, you know, there's big long rectangles. And so I can just lay these out and make a nice fresh table without having to transfer. So, but check this out. We take it to the next level. So my work board here has a built-in 90-degree angle already. And so I'll just put a couple pieces of wood down here and a little piece of wood down here. Now watch this magic trick. Now, ta-da, I can stack my project. Bam. And now I've got more room to work, because what I'm doing today is going to get real messy. We're going to be epoxying a bunch of this stuff down to the surface, and there's going to be fingerprints and messiness. And this is where you have to understand and trust the process, because you're going to get fingerprints all over them. Some of these I'll literally be installing and placing with a tiny pair of tweezers, and the trick is to get enough epoxy on the backside so that it's completely sealed. Because when you go to put the grout on, like a tile floor, you don't want the grout to be able to get up underneath the piece of glass. And the reason I say all this is because this is a textured glass, and if you use just a tiny little film of epoxy, you're not going to get a seal because you've got texture underneath there, you know, little pockets. So at any rate, you're going to have to watch out for that and apply the epoxy liberally. You can always go back, and once it dries and sets up, you can cut the epoxy with an X-Acto knife and it'll pop right off and clean right up. You don't want to try to wipe it when the epoxy is still wet, because it'll smear like silicone. And what I'm talking about, I'm using a clear 2-part epoxy. Has very low resistance to turning yellow, but I'll do several pieces of glass down onto my main picture, and then I'll clean everything up, and then I'll glue some more, and then I'll clean it up, because I got to make sure that I don't have too much epoxy, and I need to make sure I don't have too little epoxy. So my magic bucket of scraps, this is going to be, I'll save all these scraps. We're going to do something with them someday, but it's so hard to throw away glass scraps, and let me tell you. So okay, so we have our I and that last letter there. What I want to do now is make sure that this is nice and clean. So I like to use coffee filters for that because they don't scratch, and it's like well, it's like using newspapers and ammonia. And this right here, in some cases, this is your last chance to get that weird fingerprint off that you may regret later. And it inevitably happens. You know, we're not machines. But this is your last chance to really make sure that you're not gluing fingerprints down, right? So what I've done here is I've taped off. See, where I put my tape is right there, going all the way around and covering the very border of this entire project, right? I'm not concerned with the border right now because I have all these other colors, and I have several other glass colors that I want to look at, and I might want to use something different for the border. So I've taped off where the border would be, and that establishes a nice straight line to line stuff up with if you've got stuff you want to glue along the edge, because that tape will cut right off with an epoxy, you know, with the X-Acto knife if it's epoxy. So we'll get this splash cleaned off, and we're gonna show you how I deal with mixing epoxy, and then your life turns into literally a state of waiting for the glue to dry. So I have other things going on around the house, and we're going to be a lot of starting and stopping at this phase, because I'm not going to do any more glass cutting, and I'm not going to do any more grinding until all of this is glued into place. And here pretty soon, another hour or so, we'll be able to lift it up and look at it in the air, and it'll be really cool. So I get excited about this phase. Oh, let me get one more of those. Maybe two more. Okay. So we've got a nice, fresh, clean surface. And what I do, if you remember yesterday, we cut that big giant piece of glass out of that old window. I've got all kinds of scraps that I can cut down into tiny scraps. So what I do when I'm making epoxy, because I know I'm not doing all this at once. I'm going to be making several batches of epoxy. And so I'll just cut several of these. We'll cut several of these up. And that's just simply to have, now I can make 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 batches of epoxy. And, I was thinking about making some playing cards out of glass. It might be kind of cool, because you could paint the back. Anyways. So I make and just cut up some scraps. So now I have 5 or 6 different pallets to mix epoxy on. And then normally I like to keep myself knee deep in toothpicks, but I ran out and I didn't go get any more. So we're going to use some Q-tips, and I cut the cotton part off because I don't want that cotton getting mixed in my glue. But then I left the cotton part on the other end because it'll be real helpful in cleaning up any little accidents along the way. And then another thing, when you're working with this stuff, you want to make sure you have an extra rag, possibly a couple of damp coffee filters. And these will help you out of a jam real quick if you get yourself sideways, because the goal now is to not put fingerprints underneath the glass that you're gluing down. And trust me when I say to you, I don't think I've built anything yet that doesn't have my fingerprints embedded somewhere in it, where it just, you're just like, oh my gosh, I didn't see that. But just still, the effort is still worth your time, right? So at any rate, so I got my little tweezers if I need them. I've got my little coffee filter. And I handle my bottles of epoxy with a coffee filter. The goal, like I said, is all about trying to keep your hands clean for right now. And so, let me get that at a better angle maybe. So, and then you just mix equal parts. And we don't need a whole lot. That's going to do quite a bit of this glass. We'll get pretty far with it. And you just want to make sure that you really mix it until it all looks cloudy, because both of those piles of goop are going to look real clear. And then you're going to mix them together and they're going to look cloudy. Now you've got several minutes of working time, and it will turn from, like right now, it's like melted Vaseline, but in a few minutes, it'll be like a real thick tar. And in a few minutes after that, it'll be a sticky substance that you can wipe off on. So this will dry in different phases. And like I said, because we're starting in the middle, I'm not concerned about squishing any out on the sides. We'll clean that up later. So what I do want is to just get started. And before I put a piece down, if I'm conscientious about it, these pieces are pretty clean because they've been grinded in a wet grinder and then cleaned off with a towel. So they're pretty clean already. And I'll just take, and I'll make sure I got enough goop on there that it's going to push out around the edges on all sides. And this stuff will float up in the air if you don't really push it down and push it in there, right? And then your line might disappear on you for a second. Now it's going to clear up, but this is why we've gone over all of our lines with magic marker to make them stand out more. And you want to make sure that they're not floating. You want to press them into place. And so right now, there's so much epoxy in there that I'm going to have to cut that out for the grout to get in. But we're not concerned with that right now. That's the next step's problem, right? And the only thing you can do in the meantime is trying to manage the perfect amount to deal with the textured glass and having a nice seal and not messing up. And sometimes you can go ahead and scrape it away, but I wouldn't play with it too much while it's too wet. You're just going to run into all kinds of problems. And you know, we're dealing with tiny, tiny pieces. That's just part of one, you know. Okay. See, now that's probably going to have fingerprints on it. I felt it. I felt the backside. Good. Just going to gently push that into place. Just want to make sure we leave a nice gap for the grout. And already getting my fingers a little sticky and a little dirty. That's okay. We got good coverage going on here. Good spacing. And one more little teeny tiny piece on that letter. So the mess that it makes is another reason why I try to not glue it all down at once. Because now, as these pieces shift and settle and that epoxy settles on its own gravity, just like water, it's going to find its own level. Some of these pieces may move around on you. So I'm managing that while still keeping in mind that I have other pieces that so I just using up what epoxy I have left. We're going to jump over here to this W, put that first piece down. And get that anchored into place. That really is the anchor for that whole W. So we want to make absolutely sure that line doesn't move. Okay. Then we'll go down here and we can glue. So we're just going to use up the rest of this epoxy and do some pieces scattered around so we don't bump into anything. The last thing we want to do is go back and touch something that we've already messed with. Because in about 10 or 15 minutes, that epoxy will be set up enough and we'll be able to go back and deal with any problems before we go on to the next phase. So there's enough left to do a couple of these feathers up here. We'll put a couple feathers on. See, it's getting real thick. Now you have to really make sure you're using enough to fill in the backside of a textured piece of glass. Kind of press it down in place a little bit. And we'll get the next one. These little tips are where you're going to get grout underneath of them. It's almost impossible to avoid. But this is also where keep the glue off of my hands a little bit better. I'll use a pair of these tweezers to attack the problem with. Whoa! You don't want to be moving that around too much. So we are going to have to go back and cut the epoxy off of here. And like I say, I keep reiterating and repeating because I'm concentrating and I sound a bit robotic. But it's totally okay to make a mess. And we're just getting everything established and making sure that we don't lose any pieces in the build process. And I was getting kind of bored with glass cutting, and I was tired of babysitting all those hundreds of pieces. I just wanted to get a couple of them down. So, and in a minute, since that's a straight line, I'm going to push those into place. And I keep wanting to pick that up left-handed, but I don't have enough dexterity to lay that into place left-handed. Because this stuff is getting really goopy and sticky. All right, we'll get one more piece and that wing will be done. And see, it's getting really stringy like cheese now. Almost don't know if I want to use it. I should totally be using my tweezers on this. Just keep them fingerprints off that glass as much as possible. It's okay. Now, because I have a row of things that I'm trying to line up and keep lined up, I'm just going to go in here one time and just put a nice straight line across everything by pushing everything up like a bulldozer into place. So now our epoxy is getting a little too stiff to work with, a little too stiff to spread. I'm going to throw this palette in the trash. I'm going to clean up the epoxy that I've got on my fingertips. We're going to give this a few minutes to rest. Make sure we don't need to push any pieces into place better. Possibly this one. That one trying to shift on us. It may shift, but it's okay. We've got the border established. The feathers are looking good. It's looking good. Be right back. All right. All right. All right. We're ready to move on to the next batch. We're going to get a little bit more done. But we need a fresh batch of epoxy. Alright, make just a little bit of a smaller batch this time. That one got a little bit messy and goopy. Got our hands cleaned up and we're ready to rock and roll. Just making, and it helps if you make it smaller batches. You don't need, we're not trying to do the whole thing all at once. We're doing all this incrementally because there's several things that we will address as we go. So I want to stay away from the letters that I've just glued. So I'm going to start off with the bird. Be real careful, keep that epoxy off my fingers. But better to have too much than not enough. You can always remove material. You can't necessarily just reinvent more. It looks like I've got a smudge I need to clean off of there before I go any further. Okay, that's got a kind of a mark on it. I enjoy this part. But I need to make myself, I've got some wood. I need to make a nice little stool I can sit on when I'm working like this. Just nice, quiet, meditative. You know, for people that like to build puzzles and stuff, this is pretty much what I'm doing, is just building a puzzle. This piece keeps moving on. Albeit a bit of a wet puzzle, but it is a puzzle. Puzzling, isn't it? Okay, that's looking nice. Yay! It's looking good. I like the way this looks so far, guys. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you learned something. This is a bit tedious to watch and observe, I imagine, unless you're the one doing it. But maybe it's ASMR to you. Maybe you enjoy the sound of somebody working in the background. I don't know. Maybe you enjoy watching people work. Maybe you're trying to learn about stained glass. Maybe you're somebody that knows me and just trying to figure out what I'm up to. But right here is exactly what I'm up to. So, welcome. I'm glad you're here. We've got our first few pieces of the eagle and the wings and the lettering glued into place. So we've got this much glued down, and we're gonna go ahead and glue the rest of that, and then we're gonna get back to some more glass cutting and getting this pattern together the way I want it. So we got a little bit of epoxy left from that batch. We'll go ahead and start on this letter. And these pieces here, they are so small that if you drop them, they can actually land on their edge and cause you to think it's laying flat when it's actually standing on edge. So that's how thin of the margins I'm working with here. I mean, this is a rather large piece considering. There's hundreds of pieces. I'm going to count it here. I don't know when, but eventually I'll know exactly how many pieces. There's still a lot left to cut, and I'm adding as I go, because now I'm into the artistic side where once this basic pattern is satisfied, I'm going to take some artistic license with some of the coloration and some of the little extra shapes and highlights in the background that I'll fill in, and just little doodads to make it extra, you know. It's the little things. Okay. I have to babysit those. Those are just kind of seeming like they're wanting to shift around on me. And they're floating in a sea of epoxy. And so they want to settle in to the gravity, you know, like water finds its own level. But that's okay. I think we got just enough epoxy to do one more little piece. And we'll need to mix up a new batch and work on a different section. Looks like everything there stayed nicely into place. Looking good. I'm happy with this so far. Move that just a hair. Okay. Where was that? Okay. Right there. Right there. Make sure that's still working there. Okay. All right. So that's that batch of epoxy. I'll set that aside when this all dries up and sets up. Then I just flip it over and I can use it to make another batch. So I'll even use all my scraps for all kinds of stuff. So I'm down to 3 playing cards left. Let's hope I got it straight. Let's see. So now we're going to go ahead and do the rest of these feathers on this other wing. And then I think we'll take a bit of a break and regroup. Let me see here. Okay. Put a little bit more. Okay. And that might be a bad mix. It's too late. We're going to let that slide. It'll be fine. As long as it turns nice and cloudy and you get it mixed up really well, you don't have to be perfectly exacting with the proportions. So welcome, I'm glad you're here, doing some of the quiet work today. And you know, it doesn't hurt even, you know, you get in a hurry because you want to build and you want to get stuff done and you want to see something through. But with this epoxy, it only has like a 10 or 15 minute set time, right? Which that puts your brain in a space to feel like you really need to hurry. And in all actuality, you should mix it up and let it sit for 30 or 40 seconds and get a little bit firmer, and then it spreads a little bit easier, more like a silicone paste. Um, so at any rate, and it doesn't really matter. It just depends on how you work and what you like and how you do it. Everybody does their things their own way. The main thing is to get a nice layer of goop between this layer of glass and this layer of glass. That's all what really matters. But carefully. Okay. 4 more and we'll be done with the eagle. We're looking pretty good. Just being careful to keep the epoxy off my fingertips. Which is kind of like making God laugh. How do you make God laugh? Tell him your plan. Every time. Alright, so these pieces are getting pretty dicey, as in size wise, so we're going to switch over to the tweezers. And of course I dropped it right into the epoxy on the wrong side. Let's try that again. And the reason I do this so carefully, and I'd rather have a bunch pouring out, is because, oh my goodness, it stuck to the tweezers. I would rather clean up the mess of the excess than not get enough epoxy on there, and that causes the grout to escape underneath your glass pieces, and that's a real bummer. Okay, thought I felt something move there. Alright, I'm gonna have to clean these tweezers off. They're trying to stick onto my glass now. Okay. Well, that's a lot of extra epoxy on there. Like I said, I'm not worried about that. I'm gonna be cleaning that off. I'll probably do that later on off camera and late at night when I'm bored and trying to wind down. I'll just come over and stand around and cut away at it with an X-Acto knife as I go. Alright. Double check everything's sitting in place. All we got left is the rest of the W. We are rocking and rolling on this project, and this has got just enough viscosity to spread, so we're going to do a couple more pieces. I might be able to get the rest of the W with just this glue. That'd be nice. Okay, there's one piece. That's set down in there nicely. This red glass does require a lot of epoxy though, because it's textured. And you want to make sure you fill in all the gaps of the texture. I think. Uh-oh. Make sure I got that face in the right direction. Couple more pieces, we're almost there. Oh my, what happened? Lost sight of where I was there. I'm not gonna be able to, well, maybe. It's gonna be real close if I can get that last piece. I don't think there's enough epoxy to do that last piece, darn it. I have to make a whole new batch for one piece. Pushing everything into shape a little bit better. Make sure that, you know what, I think I do. It's gonna be close. Took every last bit on my palette. That's good. So that means no waste, right? As long as it fills in the gaps around the edges and doesn't let any grout through, it's fine. All right, last piece. The spacing might be a little tight, but it looks nice. Okay. Awesome, guys. Check it out. So we have here, all of this is now officially glued and epoxied. And if you're looking at it real close, you'll notice the goozy mess all around the edges of everything. That's the epoxy. And we'll let that set up for a couple hours, and I'll go back and I'll clean that off. And while this is setting up and I'm waiting to clean this part up, I will be addressing some of the other issues. I still need to grind. I still need to grind the basketball. And I have the I, oops, you can't see that. So I have the I, the R, the G, and the E is ground out and ready. I need to address the rest of the letters and make sure they're all good to go. And then, I'll show you here, my cool little transformer table. So we've still got the basketball and the number 13. And then I have the cross to do, and I need to cut a few more pieces of glass out for the cross. There's a gold border that goes around the outside. Excuse me. And then I have, oh my goodness, pardon me. So I've got all my background laid out and mapped and ready to be cut. Got some of it cut already, and these squares going through the background. So I've got quite a lot left to do. And so what I did today is going to really help alleviate a little bit of project stress and project mess. Because now, instead of these 50 or 60 pieces floating around in my studio, they are officially glued and in place, and I don't need to think about them for a while. So what I do need to think about is cleaning my hands up. We're managing fingerprints as much as we can at this stage. So I'm going to go ahead and end my stream there. I'm going to catch up on a few little details and doodads, and we're going to come back tomorrow, and this thing's really going to start coming together. We still have a frame to build. We still have we have the frame yet to decide which color, and I have other colors that I might want. So I've taped off where the frame is going to go, so I still have my straight line, but it's a blank space. So when all of this is glued down, I'm going to be able to put that window in the window, or put the window up in the light, and start looking at some other color that are going to match that, so to be perfect for my border is what I'm trying to say. So we haven't decided on the border color. We're going to do that very last. There's going to be a few pieces of glass that we cut in as accent pieces where we change out one color and put another color in just for artistic integrity. So there's a lot left to do, but we have rounded home plate. We've got some glass glued down to the matrix, and we're sailing right along. I've still got a bunch of other projects, and let me interest you in the two most interesting words that any kayaker, outdoor man, and inventor has ever uttered in the English language. Nobody has ever combined these two things with the excitement when I say to you, those two words are silicone socks. I'm going to replace my waterproof boots. I'm going to experiment and make a pair of silicone socks to keep my feet dry when I get in and out of my kayak. So it just will be a little side project. I still need to make a giant push pull. I've got some wood and I'm going to carve a nice round end so I can use it to push my kayak, to shove it into a little notch on my boat, and it pushes it up the hill on my cart real nice. So I want to make a push pull, and let's see what else. The kayak's all together. We've gotten everything all together. We've got about another week to 10 days of severe storms coming and going. So I will be ready. This project will be about 99.9% done. But like I said, I want to get all of this glued down like we did today so I can start selecting what colors that I want to use for that border. So I really appreciate y'all dropping by today. Thank you for the likes and the subs. Come back. We'll show you more progress. We get a little bit more done every day. I'm not a workaholic by any means, but I do really enjoy this. But I have a lot of other projects to do. And y'all have a wonderful afternoon. Get busy with your projects.